I'm Frederick Gerten, and I'm the filmmaker.
And I'm Leilani Farha, and I'm the advocate.
And this means that we're back at the Pushback Talks.
We are.
And it's like this episode number 20.
Oh, if it is, we should have a celebration. 20, that's a milestone.
Yeah, I have a glass of water here.
Oh, yeah, I've got some tea.
We can have some wine. We can have some wine later on. But it's like cool. We started this like in a way to try to stay relevant in the midst of this pandemic because we can't go anywhere. And now it's getting to be a habit to meet you and do this podcast every week. And of course, it's stressful as a producer at the production company of documentaries that we can't film. And this podcast is totally not generating any money at all to pay our rents and so on. So it's a bit stressful, but it's still, I tried not to think about that now. So, Leilani, how's your day? Is there any hope out there?
Okay, well, in terms of hope, there's a lot of hope. I received from our dear Hope, those of you who listened to the episode, many episodes ago, you will have been introduced to Hope, a young 17-year-old Londoner who is really interested in the right to housing and trying to make sure she has a future and that her generation has a future. Anyway, Hope tweeted at me today to tell me that our dear friend, the CEO of Blackstone, the big private equity firm, Stephen Schwartzman, is going to be interviewed at the London School of Economics in a public interview. So she and I were brainstorming about trying to get some information like, the film push to the guy who's going to be doing the interview. So we're working on that. We just this morning that happened. So that I like that. I think it's a smart thing to do. And I'll get the interviewer the Blackstone letters that I wrote when I was special rapporteur on the right to housing, just so that he is well equipped for that interview, so that it's not a softball interview.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. And Leilani, you and I we didn't know each other before I started to do this film push, but suddenly we tend to hang out a lot. And during the film shoot, we traveled to many places because that was your job as a UN Special Rapporteur on Adequate Housing. But 3 years ago today, the day we were recording, we were in Barcelona.
We were. It was a special, very special time.
It was a special day of many reasons because it was the day where the Spanish authorities arrested a lot of the regional leaders.
Crazy.
And we were inside the city council with the mayor, and on the square outside were all the media, and we were like the only film crew on the inside. It was like a special feeling, and Ada Colau, the mayor of Barcelona, still the mayor, was really, she was the most important person in Catalonia that day, but she still gave us time, and I'm really happy for that and what we got into the film. So today we are returning to Barcelona.
We are. It's special.
Yes.
Very special.
And we are doing it because, these days the news media is only talking about two things. It's pandemic or it's American elections, something it's been, it will go on forever. This kind of extremely stupid focus on one country on the planet when there are so many more. So for us in Sweden, for you in Canada, and the audience we have now in 89 countries for this podcast. 89, it's kind of cool. Not many people will get through their normal media, updates on what happens in Spain. So we have a special guest today.
We do.
And it's a friend of yours. I don't know if you've met, but anyway, it's Jaime Palomera Zaidel, who is one of these defenders of the human right of housing, but he's also a spokesperson of a new tenant union in Spain, formed only 4 years ago, but that has been now really influential by, actually sketching new legislations and pushing them through, which has really moved Spain in forward. But Jaime is also a doctor of anthropology, and he's a researcher at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. Bienvenido a nuestro pod, Jaime.
Welcome.
Muchas gracias.
It's so great to have you here. You're totally inspiring, as is the Tenants Movement. Can't wait to hear more.
Muchas gracias. It's a real pleasure for me to be with you guys, whom I admire a lot. And yeah, I'm looking forward to this conversation.
The special thing with Spain, which not many people know, is that it's been the battleground of the thing that we talk a lot about in Push, by the big vulture funds like Blackstone and people who are actually trying to stay in their homes. So it's been such a strong movement. So it's actually created a new political party, which is called Podemos, and that party is now the mayor of the city of Barcelona and many other cities, but they're also now in the national government of Spain. So this movement has really been something that has been changing the political agenda in Spain. So we want to know a lot. Leilani and I, we are trying to follow whatever happens out there. We see a lot of people fighting evictions. It's like all the time people standing outside houses where the police are going to evict people. And I guess this is still something that you are into every day, isn't it, Jaime?
Yeah, I would say that, Spain is kind of a paradigm in two ways. On the one hand, in the ways that finance, capital, and real estate operates nowadays on a global level, increasingly. And on the other hand, Spain is also a paradigm of the different ways in which people are organizing to, defend the right to housing. So I think, we can talk about both if you want.
Definitely.
But we talk about Blackstone 2011, 2012, entering into the American housing market and buying up debt. They're buying debt, which basically means people's homes. Only we had that in a previous podcast here, talking about with Aaron Glantz, the writer of Home Wreckers. He talked about Blackstone picking up 80,000 homes only in California, but then Blackstone moved into Spain. Can you tell us a short version of Blackstone coming into your country?
Well, as you all know, in 2008. With the financial crisis, Blackstone starts buying up a lot of housing in the US, and they actually decide that the next big business is going to be in rents, in the rental market. So, a lot of the housing that they acquired after, the crazy wave of evictions that came from the mortgage crisis, they thought that people wouldn't be able to, especially impoverished people, but just normal, ordinary people wouldn't be able to buy as much as they did in the past, that they would have to access housing through the rental market. So they thought this is, the new big business for us. And there are several reports already during the financial crisis where Blackstone states clearly that, the next move is Spain after the US. And the idea for them was that Spain was very attractive because of the huge mortgage financial crisis, because there was a lot of housing that they could buy very cheap to speculate with afterwards. And they also saw Spain as as a way to enter Europe, because what they started doing in Spain, now they're doing all over Europe, all over the world, in fact, as you very well know. Somehow Spain for them was like a laboratory. And what they managed to do, not just Blackstone, also, Cerberus, they entered Spain through the Republican Party and through the right-wing party in Spain, which were very well connected through the previous Prime Minister, José María Aznar. And basically all of these huge investment funds, what they did was to get the Spanish state to change the rules of the game. So first of all, they did it so that they could get hundreds of thousands of housing units at a very low price. all the housing that banks had accumulated because of the mortgage crisis.
And they bought them like in a package. So normal people couldn't buy. You need to be a billionaire to be able to buy, I guess.
In a very short span, Blackstone bought around 40,000 housing units. And then what they did, which was key, was to get the Spanish government to change rent laws to begin with. So they diminished rent protections for tenants. So they said, we're gonna buy all this housing, but we want rent to be a profitable business for us. So first of all, we need to be able to evict tenants after 3 years at least. So, rent contracts were reduced, their duration. And then the next thing they did was to get all these fiscal privileges from the state. So if you are Blackstone or Cerberus or any of these financial funds, and you create a real estate investment trust, which is one of these vehicles they use to manage all of this housing, well, then you don't pay, well, you pay less taxes than anyone, than any small business. So all of this, the result of all of this was that they were able to increase rental prices like never before in our history.
And can you tell us how, because I've seen numbers from Barcelona that the rents have gone up like 50 or 100% in a few years.
Exactly. In the last 4 or 5 years, rent prices have spiked by 40% in cities like Madrid, Barcelona, but in just many other cities. And many of the people behind these funds and in the real estate market said, okay, if you not everybody can live in the city center, just move to the suburbs. Well, the thing is that prices in the suburbs are going up, as much as they are going up in the city center.
Because Blackstone is also, they are also buying up in the urban suburban areas also.
Yeah, one of the things that we're seeing is that although Blackstone is not they have become the biggest landlords very fast, but it's true that they do not control the whole. It's not a monopoly or an oligopoly. But what they've done is that they've become influencers. Yes. We say in Spanish, which means it's an English word, but we say it in Spanish. And what they do is that they've changed in many ways how people approach housing. So local landlords, corporate landlords, not global funds, are somewhat mimicking what Blackstone is doing.
I think, Jaime, I think I think we see this all over the world, that
exactly.
this kind of the financial sector are not super creative people. They are basically copycats, and they are copying what others do. And I think that's why we have this crazy development all over the world, because a lot of money is going into homes right now. How do you, this is what you've been looking into, Leilani.
When I wrote, when I was the special rapporteur, I wrote a series of letters, which are now called the Blackstone letters. And that was one of my allegations against Blackstone, not just, as you said, Jaime, that they're doing bad and causing distress to tenants, but that they established a business model that is being replicated the world over by asset management firms and pension funds and insurance companies and et cetera. And that is part of the problem. I just want to return to something you said, Jaime, though, that I think is so important that often gets lost. And you articulated it more clearly than most others, and I really liked it, which is you said the government of Spain allowed this to happen. I mean, you said it in different ways, but they changed their own legislation. And I think often we want to kind of go after this dark, evil corporate entity, even the name Blackstone, you want to go after them. But I think we have to equally hold our governments to account for what they allowed to happen. They've changed the legislation. They made REITs or REITs very friendly financial instrument, etc. So I'm super happy that you named the government of Spain.
This was also a model that was copied all over the world, because the message from the International Monetary Fund and from the European Central Bank and so on was that you have to open up you'd have to be more liberal in a way of inviting money. Then you have to make it easier for money to be invested in your country, which kind of basically opened the door for Blackstones in tons of countries, and now we're suffering the effects of it. And of course, this is why we are also doing the pushback talks, because we know that after this crisis, the pandemic crisis, there will be a lot of new measures again. So now it's really time to look out for what they're planning to do. But let's go back to Spain. Jaime, the resistance. I mean, you're a part of this, and Spain, the Spanish people really took to the streets and they defended neighbors from evictions.
One of the things that we've been seeing over the last years is that as a result of this new wave of speculation in the rental market, the eviction rates have been going up, and it's unbelievable. But we are now in a wave of evictions, the likes of which it's very similar to what we saw after the huge financial crisis.
So today it's back at the big high levels of evictions.
It's more or less the same. When during the mortgage crisis, everybody thought this is a crisis, which we hope to see the end of, in the near future, whatever. And then somehow it's become structural. This was not, in Spain, evictions were not part of daily life. And they are, again, not only in Spain. This is a global problem, as you very well know. The new element is that in 2008, 2009, during the last crisis, evictions were seen as a problem of the most vulnerable populations. But since for the real estate and the financial market, the rent market has become, the new big business for them, so-called, middle class or working class, many, people from, in very different situations are affected by the housing problem. Housing is something that affects not just the most vulnerable, but increasingly a majority of the population. So one of the things that we started doing 3 years ago was to say that if the rental law is unfair because it allows a landlord to blackmail you at the end of the contract, because it allows that landlord to say, you either pay me, 400 more euros every month, or you can leave next month. If the law allows any landlord to do this, because it's unfair, because it goes against human rights, we have the right to disobey it. Basically, it's been a campaign of civil disobedience, peaceful, non-violent. But so after all these months, around 2,000 households, 2,000 families have not accepted, these rental hikes. So we're talking about people that have joined this campaign, and what they've done is that when they get the letter saying, for instance, from Blackstone, saying that next month, instead of 1,000 euros, you'll have to pay 2,000 euros, because that's what's happening. So what this family does is that they say, okay, look, this is not fair. I want to negotiate a fair price. I'm going to keep paying 1,000 euros. And I know you're going to have all your lawyers trying to evict me, but I have my organization. I have the people behind me. I have the tenants union. So I'm going to try and negotiate. I want you to sit down and to treat me like a human being. And I want to negotiate a new rental contract that doesn't endanger my family and my whole community. After all these years of disobedience, 3 years more or less, we've managed to write a new law that regulates rent prices temporarily for 5 years. And this is a cap that not only puts limits, so no more increases, but it also forces landlords to reduce the price if the price is especially high.
So it sounds like what's been happening in Berlin, or maybe also in Denmark.
Yes.
Yeah.
Berlin is the other city in the world that is doing something or has done something similar. In fact, they were kind of a reference for us. And all of these years of disobedience, of anonymous people fighting back and not accepting their eviction, not accepting them being, strangled by impossible rents, this has allowed all of us collectively to start changing the laws. And what's interesting is that Blackstone has now created a lobby that is specifically devised to respond to us, to our movement.
Oh, you should be proud.
Yeah.
Because this we have in common. They don't like us either, So it's.
I think it's so inspirational in a very practical way, what you're doing in Spain. When I look at North America, for example, and you look at the United States that has been well penetrated by Blackstone and Goldman Sachs and all of these big financial actors, I think in the United States and in Canada, we're now also infiltrated by these actors, asset management firms, etc. There isn't a sense that tenants have any power to resist. There are embryonic movements here and there, but it isn't strong like in Berlin and in Barcelona.
We're constantly reading the history of the housing movements in the US and especially New York. And one day we were both amazed and at the same time humbled by the fact that many of the things that we're doing nowadays were already invented a century ago in New York, by Irish tenants. In fact, this campaign of disobedience, we thought we were being extremely creative and, because in Spain it had no precedent, disobeying, in the rental market. And it turns out, then we found out that in New York, this went a long way back. And then we also learned that in New York, people, managed to gain the right to strike, the right not to withhold rent if the landlord does not, fulfill their maintenance obligations. And we were, how did they get this? Well, basically because a lot of people defended their rights when the laws were against them.
Also, even in Push, we meet people in Toronto who are on rent strike, and in the end, they are successful. And then in the end, they meet people from Hamilton coming to Toronto to kind of be inspired. And they were all really, working class people who are taking on, really creating the experience while doing it. So it wasn't like something organized from the top. It was really people doing it.
The first time that we held an assembly and we invited people to come, we said, if you have, on the Barcelona scale, we sent a message and we said, if you have problems with your rent, if they're trying to push up your rent and it's unfair, come and meet with us. And then we tried and we said to people, look, you should not accept this. You should say, no, we know that the law is against you, but you have a movement with you now.
And now you're drafting legislation. Now you moved really one step up. So you're into changing the rules of the game in the whole of Spain. Even if you're being firstly successful now in Catalonia, but now you're taking it to the next step now. Can you tell us about that?
So one of the things we did last year in 2019 was to extend rental contracts. So to undo some of Blackstone and the other investment funds changes. So now we have rental contracts that are 5-year long if your landlord is not a company, not a corporation. And if it's a corporation, then the contract has to be 7-year long.
It's clever.
Can you
amazing.
Repeat this? This is interesting, Leilani. So if it's a corporation that is your landlord, the contract needs to be 7-year long.
It's very long.
Yeah, for Sweden, it's a lifetime contract, so it's different,
In Canada, it's a year long or month to month.
Now here is it's a lifetime, there is a round of negotiations between the tenant union and the landlords. But of course, Blackstone found ways to make money also in Sweden because they find ways to round also our legislation. That happened the same in Denmark and other countries. So they're creative and they have like great lawyers to mess around. But this is for Spain, I guess this is really strong, 7-year contracts. So this is the new legislation you're going for.
We just took to court one of these huge equity funds because what they're doing now is that they are finding ways of increasing the price during the contract, because the idea of a 7-year contract, during the 7-year contract, the price is always the same. The only change possible is according to inflation. Investment funds, especially, what they're doing is that after the 3rd year, they add all of these extra costs. And it's actually completely illegal, but they're doing it in a systematic and organized way. They get together and they, with their organizations, to see how they can avoid following, what the law obliges them to do. And then the other thing that we did was that if the landlord is a corporation, then the tenant should never have to pay the broker fees. So, because that's a huge problem we have too. So the market is very deregulated, but also the middleman market. So the brokers, they basically give a service to landlords, but they charge the tenant. This is something that, by the way, New York or Buenos Aires recently managed to change. Now tenants don't pay. And then the other big transformation, more recent one, is the regulation of prices. And this is a law that we literally wrote with the Catalan government, also with a majority of the parliament. We had negotiations with many different parties. We had the support of thousands of organizations. Civil society was with us, basically. Economic, cultural, social organizations, the third sector, all sorts of associations. This was fundamental to win the fight, really, because when people in government, the main political parties, see that this is not just a housing movement, it's society at large asking, for the human right to housing to be defended.
That's the success of the movements in especially Barcelona, Catalonia, but also overall in Spain, but also and then in Berlin, is that in these places, I mean, even if there's a lot of resistance in Toronto, in Ottawa, in Stockholm, and around the world, but in these two cities, these two centers, the narrative is it's big headlines. It's like it's on everybody's mind. And that's the way you move politics. You move politics by making this the thing everybody talks about. So if it's only something you talk about out somewhere, the experience of the others, then it's something that can just roll on. But if suddenly it's the experience of all of us, then it's hard for politics to, or let's put it the other way, it's easier for the politicians to keep the lobbyists away. Because it is also a battle between the lobby, then very well-funded lobby with Blackstone pouring in money, and towards the resistance of the civil society. So that's really cool, and that's why we should be inspired by Berlin and Barcelona.
Yeah, well, I think that's right. I think that's what we're trying to do with the shift, is try to create a global narrative that resonates with groups like the tenants union that you're leading and working with, Jaime, and trying to say, look, there's this narrative in Barcelona, in Berlin, in Sacramento, California, in New York, and wherever, and in Lagos, for example, very strong narrative there, a counter narrative to the dominant narrative. And why I love it is not just because we need it, and I fully believe, and it's why I fully believed in Frederick's push project, because I believe we need different narratives, but it's so important for people to be able to say, this is for people who have no power, no money, to say, this is my narrative, and to actually help those people have a voice and have a narrative in this crazy world that we're living in. So I think the work you're doing is amazing in that front. Can I ask one last kind of legislative question? Do you still have a law in Spain that prohibits evictions into homelessness? Because I remember at some point the government had passed some legislation that said that, and that you had a system where an eviction could go to court, but that an adjudicator couldn't allow that eviction to go forward if he or she knew that that person had nowhere to live once evicted, and that a social worker was supposed to come and work with the family or the household to find them some place to live or to negotiate terms so they could remain. But I've lost track of what's happened. That's a very important concept, because in international human rights law, eviction into homelessness is a violation of the right to housing, period. There's no way of looking at it any other way. And so I always thought that law was so interesting. But what has happened?
Well, I'm sorry to give you this very bad news, but the truth is that the Spanish government is currently ignoring all of the United Nations requirements to actually stop this kind of evictions. So just to give you an example, in the last month, only in the city of Barcelona, 434 families have been evicted in the middle of the pandemic.
Wow.
This is 1,200 people, 700 adults, and around 400 children. This only in the city of Barcelona. Both the housing movement and the city council and other organizations are asking the Spanish government to at least prohibit evictions of vulnerable populations, people with no housing alternative, at least during the pandemic. And the government so far is not listening to these, public outcry, not just organizations, also the media. The media are talking about this.
That's what I hear is I hear pure violence. It's extremely brutal.
Yeah, and the violence has to do with the fact that the housing movement is very strong. So why people ask? The truth is that why is the government sending a riot police to evict an impoverished family, with 3 children, with a baby? Well, the reason is that they do this because they know that activists are going to be at the door. Otherwise, we see riot police when there are people in front of the building's entrance trying to protect the family. There's no riot police when there's no, when it's an invisible eviction that nobody knows about. But the good news is that people are mobilizing a lot. And to go back to your question before, Leilani, I think that one of the things that's happening here is that a lot of young people that have ideals are currently entering the housing movement. And one of the first things they do when they want to defend this right is to go and stop evictions.
I think this is, because you started off with a message from our friend Hope, 17 year in London. And we have a lot of young listeners to our podcast, because this is of course a really huge issue for young people. Where I'm going to live, can I ever afford a home? And this is like, you have this in every city around the world. We've been to Seoul, South Korea, we've been to San Francisco, we've been to Buenos Aires, to Santiago de Chile, you were in Lagos and Cairo. This is what people are talking about. Also here in Sweden, even if we on the paper have more protection, but people feel an enormous stress, and especially the young people. So this is...
Can I give you a figure?
Go.
Right now in Spain, only 2 out of 10 young people can leave the parents' home. And by young people, I mean below 34 years old.
2 out of 10 below 34.
20%. Whoa.
Yes. So, 8 out of every 10 young people, well, people under 34, cannot move out of their parents' home. And that also explains, I think, why young people across all, I would say social classes almost, like people from all sorts of backgrounds, see housing as a real problem that's going to define their, future. I think that that's not something limited only to Spain or Barcelona. I think this is a global problem, as you know.
Yeah. And I'm totally certain that this issue will be the issue over the coming years also, because we can feel it when we talk to people. It's that I think that journalists and politicians are a bit behind, and they haven't really grasped it yet. And of course, the lobby are totally busy with their storytelling, their solutions to the crisis, which normally means less rules. They want it to be easier for them. It's like the message from the lobby forever has been, take away the regulations and happiness will come. And we know that these regulations means that the income inequality this gap is bigger than ever around the planet. So our answer should be more democracy and more rules, more regulations.
Yeah, I think we're really witnessing the failure of all this deregulation, which in fact is a way of regulating, favoring the interests of the most powerful. Yeah. But over the last 35 years, they've been insisting upon the idea of, increasing housing supply. This will make housing affordable. We've seen exactly the opposite. And right now, in the middle of the worst crisis we've ever lived through, they keep saying that it's a supply problem. Supply has, increased by 100% in all of the major cities of Spain, while demand, so-called demand, has gone down because a lot of, young students and people that were in Barcelona or Madrid have left. And prices are, more or less at the same level that they were, during, over the last 5 years. So either if there's not a public intervention and if we don't change the paradigm, if we don't shift the paradigm, as you will say, then we're going to keep encountering the same problems.
Mm. Yep.
Any closing words, Leilani?
Oh, I was only going to add that governments are so resistant to this because it's not just about changing housing systems. It's about changing finance. And in fact, it's about dismantling the way many of our economies, both in the North and South, are structured. Housing and finance play an integral role to the actual structure of economies. And so that's why it's such a big threat and why we need to band together globally to challenge it, because it's not going to come down easily. And we've seen it in the pandemic. The pandemic should have addressed so many of the inequalities that are generated through housing systems and finance systems. And we haven't seen that. In fact, we've seen the opposite. So we have our work. My sleeves are rolled up. We have our work to do.
That's good. That's good.
Same here.
So Jaime, thank you for being a part of Pushback Talks. And I know this legislation that you now have rolling in Catalonia is now you're taking it to the national government, and you want them to kind of endorse it and protect it, because it's, of course, it's challenged in courts and so on. So, and you want it to be a national legislation. So I wish you all the best, because you're an inspiration to all of us out there trying to fight this fight. And to our friends in Catalonia, Push is available on TV3. It was just in broadcast, but it's out now on the so you can see it on their platform. And I think it's also around in other places in Spain. If not, you can go to pushthefilm.com, where you can watch the film. In the US, it's also accessible through other channels. Just go to pushthefilm.com and you will see. What more is important to say?
We need support, Frederick. We need support. How do people support Pushback Talks?
you can be a Patreon. It's a platform called patreon.com. You go to Pushback Talks. You can send us like $5 or $10 a month, and then you will help us to roll. And we are, for the people who are supporting us, our patrons, we have a private Facebook group, so you can actually be in talk with us before, and giving us ideas on what to talk about, because we don't have any big production team around this, so we need inspiration and help and feedback. Also sometimes help to reach out to interesting people around the world. So please join us. We need, if you have a mighty enemy, you need many friends. That's how we roll. So thank you very much. And Jaime Palomera Zaidel, thank you for being a part of us. And I know we will keep in contact. So, but so nice. This is the first time I see you, but it's you look great, so it's fine.
Yeah,
you
thanks.
too, guys. I just want to say it's been a great pleasure for me too, and I'm speaking on behalf of the union now. Yeah, we look up to what you do. Keep up the good work you're doing. And I think that these kinds of initiatives show us the way to go. I think that we need to build alliances on the international, global level. Whenever we do any kind of step in that direction, I can guarantee you that at a national level, it has a huge impact. That's why, whenever we have a conflict, the first thing we do is we call, the rapporteur or the previous rapporteur, like Leilani. I'm also in touch. We are also in touch with Raquel Rolnik. And because of the fact that governments are, they listen, even though sometimes it looks like they don't really follow any of the guidelines, they listen. And I think that, initiatives like The Shift, like the documentary that you've done and others are like fundamental, really. I really believe in that. We believe in them.
You.
And I love to hear, that's like a closing note, Leilani, your voice is important. Governments listen, we listen, and by talking together, we can actually change something. So thank you. And talk soon again. More podcasts to come.
Bye. Thanks, Jaime. Bye, Frederick.
Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Goodbye. Take care.
Pushback Talks is produced by WG Film. To watch Push, visit pushthefilm.com. You can also support us by becoming a Patreon at patreon.com/pushbacktalks. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you again next week.